He threw
You thought you could
$20
hide
on the
the
table
truth.
and told
But
her
the
to keep
jury
the
now
house
knows
because
everything.
it was a teardown anyway. He called her dead weight. He said she had not contributed a dime in 5 years. He walked out of that diner laughing on the phone with his mistress, convinced he had just cut loose the most useless woman in Manhattan. She was 7 months pregnant with his daughter. What Marcus Collins did not know, what he could not have
Please don't
possibly
take my
imagined,
baby.
was that the woman sitting in that booth,
It's better this
the
way,
one
Elena.
wearing the stained cardigan
I'm
and the
sorry.
messy bun, the one he
No,
had just
Elena,
served divorce
please.
papers to like
You know
she
this
was
isn't
nothing,
right. Don't let them
owned
do
the
this.
building where he worked.
Please.
She owned the company that signed his paychecks. She owned the watch brand he was obsessed with. She was worth $2.3 billion. And she had been waiting 7 years to see if he would ever love her for who she really was. He failed the test. Now she was about to teach him a lesson he would never forget. This is the story of Elena Collins, the woman they called the Ghost of Wall Street, the wife who played small so her husband could feel big, and the mother who lost everything, her home, her reputation, even her newborn daughter, before she rose from the ashes and destroyed the man who underestimated her. But here's the twist you will not see coming. It is not just about revenge. It is about something far more powerful. Stay with me until the end. Trust me, you do not want to miss how this one finishes. The roast was burning. Elena Marie Collins stood in her kitchen, 7 months pregnant, watching smoke curl from the oven like a warning she should have heeded years ago. She laughed at herself, waving a dish towel at the smoke detector before it could scream, and reached for her phone to order backup Italian from Marcello's. It was their 7th wedding anniversary. She had spent the entire day preparing. The table was set with candles, the good china, and a wrapped gift containing a framed ultrasound photo of their daughter. She had even bought Marcus's favorite vintage wine, keeping sparkling cider for herself. Everything was perfect. Everything except the roast, which now resembled a charcoal briquette. She heard Marcus's car pull into the driveway at 8:47. He was late. He was always late these days, but tonight she had convinced herself it was because he was picking up flowers or a gift. She smoothed her maternity dress, the navy blue one he used to say brought out her eyes, and waited. The front door opened. Marcus Reed Collins walked in wearing his charcoal Armani suit, his tie loosened, his face carrying an expression she had never seen before. It was cold, distant, like he was looking at a stranger. Elena smiled anyway. "Happy anniversary, honey. I burned the roast, but Marcello's is on the way. I got your favorite, the Osso Buco, and I have something to show you. The ultrasound from Tuesday is just beautiful. You can see her little fingers and..." "Elena," Marcus held up his hand. "Sit down." Something in his voice made her stomach clench. She lowered herself into the dining chair, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Marcus did not sit. He stood across from her, reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope. He slid it across the table, pushing aside the candles she had lit with such hope. "I want a divorce," he said. "I have already filed. The papers are on the counter. Sign them by Friday." Elena stared at the envelope. The words did not make sense. They were sounds without meaning, syllables that belonged to someone else's life. "Marcus?" She heard her own voice, distant and strange. "I am 7 months pregnant with your daughter." "I know." He checked his watch. His Rolex Submariner, the one she had secretly bought him for Christmas 3 years ago, with money he never knew she had. "That is why I am doing this now, before she is born. Cleaner that way. No custody complications if we split before the birth certificate." The room tilted. Elena gripped the edge of the table. "I do not understand," she whispered. "Did I do something wrong? Is this about the house? The money? I can explain, I can..." "There is nothing to explain." Marcus loosened his tie further, as if the conversation was suffocating him. "I have outgrown this, Elena. I have outgrown us. You were fine when we were starting out, but I am a senior vice president now. I need a partner who understands my world. Someone who can hold a conversation about equity splits and market volatility, not grocery lists and baby names." Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Who is she?" Marcus paused. A flicker of something, maybe surprise, crossed his face. Does it matter? It does to me. Her name is Danielle, Danny. She is the marketing director at Whitmore. She is ambitious, Elena. She is vibrant. She wears Prada, not whatever this is. He gestured at her maternity dress, the one she had chosen so carefully. She understands me. The doorbell rang. Marcello's delivery, the osso buco she had ordered to celebrate 7 years of marriage. Neither of them moved. Sign the papers, Marcus said, picking up his briefcase. My lawyer will handle the details. You can keep the car. The old one, not the Lexus. I have been generous, considering you have not contributed a dime to this household in 5 years. He walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and the house. He did not turn around. It is in my name. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. The door closed behind him. Elena sat alone in the candlelit dining room, surrounded by the smell of burnt roast and broken promises, her hand pressed against her belly where her daughter kicked. She did not cry. Not yet. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers and dialed a number she had not called in 3 months, a number that connected to a world Marcus did not know existed. A woman answered on the second ring. Elena, is everything okay? No, Grace. Elena's voice was steady now, cold in a way that would have surprised Marcus if he had heard it. It is not. Activate Protocol Omega and find out everything you can about Danielle Hartwell. She ended the call and looked at the ultrasound photo in its silver frame. Her daughter's tiny fingers, curled like a promise. I am going to fix this, Elena whispered. I promise. 20 minutes later, the stress sent her to the hospital with contractions. She called Marcus 7 times. He never answered. He was at dinner with Danielle, posting Instagram stories, laughing at jokes Elena would never hear. Elena lay in the hospital bed alone, monitors beeping, doctors murmuring about bed rest and blood pressure, and she made a decision. Marcus Collins had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He just did not know it yet. The hospital room was painted the color of old teeth. Elena had been staring at that beige wall for 6 hours, watching the morning light crawl across it like a slow tide. The contractions had stopped. The baby was fine, but the doctors wanted her to stay for observation, and she was too exhausted to argue. Her phone sat silent on the bedside table. Marcus had not called. Not once. At 9:15, a nurse with kind eyes brought her breakfast, scrambled eggs that tasted like rubber and green jello that jiggled with unsettling enthusiasm. It is green, the nurse said apologetically. We do not know why it is always green. Been that way since 1987. Elena managed a weak smile. Thank you. She had just forced down 2 bites of eggs when the door swung open and a man walked in. He was not a doctor. He wore a $3,000 suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than the nurse made in a month. Mrs. Collins. He did not smile. I am Bernard Locke. I represent your husband in the matter of your divorce. Elena set down her fork. My husband sent his lawyer to my hospital room. Time is of the essence. Bernard pulled a chair to her bedside without asking permission and opened his briefcase. Mr. Collins has prepared a generous settlement, all things considered. I am here to review the terms. He slid a stack of papers onto her breakfast tray, pushing aside the green jello. The terms are as follows. Item 1. As Mrs. Collins has not been employed outside the home for 5 years, she is entitled to minimal alimony. 2 years of transitional support at $2,000 per month. Elena said nothing. Item 2. The primary residence, located at 47 Maple Drive, is titled solely in Mr. Collins's name. Mrs. Collins will vacate within 30 days. Still nothing. Item 3. Mr. Collins will retain all investment accounts, stock options, and retirement funds, as these were acquired through his sole employment. Bernard flipped a page. Item 4. Regarding custody of the minor child. Elena's hand moved to her belly. Mr. Collins intends to seek full custody. He has provided documentation suggesting that Mrs. Collins has exhibited signs of mental instability, including delusional thinking and erratic behavior. A psychological evaluation will be requested. Mental instability. Elena's voice was flat. Based on what documentation? Bernard smiled. It did not reach his eyes. Therapy notes. Observations from concerned parties. The details are in Section 7. Elena knew those therapy notes were fabricated. She had never seen a therapist in her life. But she also knew that proving it would take time and money she was not supposed to have. You have 72 hours to sign, Bernard continued. If you do not, Mr. Collins will be forced to pursue additional legal remedies, including charges of alienation of affection and financial fraud. The process will be prolonged and expensive. I assume you cannot afford prolonged and expensive. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. Sign the papers, Mrs. Collins. Take the settlement. Find a nice apartment somewhere quiet. Raise your daughter. Move on with your life. He placed a pen on top of the stack. It is the smart choice. After he left, Elena sat motionless for a long time. Then she picked up the papers and began to read. Every line was designed to destroy her. Every clause was a trap. Marcus had spent months planning this, she realized. He had consulted lawyers, moved money, built a case against her sanity. While she was cooking his dinners and ironing his shirts, he was engineering her annihilation. She thought about the woman she had been for the past 5 years. The woman who wore stained sweatpants and clipped coupons. The woman who pretended not to notice when Marcus came home smelling of unfamiliar perfume. The woman who had hidden her true self because she wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she owned. That woman had been a fool. Elena reached for her phone and called Grace Mitchell. Tell me you have something, she said. Oh, I have something. Grace's voice was grim. Danielle Hartwell, age 29, marketing director at Whitmore & Associates, Instagram influencer with 47,000 followers. Most of them bought. MBA from State, not Wharton like she claims on her resume. She lied about her degree? Forged transcripts. I have the originals. Also, she has been wearing jewelry that Marcus reported stolen for an insurance claim 8 months ago. I have photos with timestamps. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. Insurance fraud. Fabricated credentials. Her husband had chosen a woman as corrupt as himself. There is more, Grace continued. Someone tried to breach your encrypted files last night. The IP traces back to Bernard Locke's law firm. They do not know who you are, but they know you are hiding something. Let them look. Elena's grip tightened on the phone. They will not find anything. Not until I want them to. What is the play? Elena looked at the divorce papers. 72 hours, fabricated therapy notes, a husband who thought she was helpless. The play is patience, she said. I want to know everything about Marcus's finances. Every hidden account. Every fraudulent expense report. Every dollar he has stolen from our marriage. And then? And then I am going to take it all back. But first I need a lawyer. Someone who handles cases like mine. Someone who knows how to fight dirty. Grace was quiet for a moment. I know someone, Patricia Monroe. She is a small-town attorney out of Hartford. Handles divorces for abused women. She is not fancy, but she is mean as a snake when she needs to be. Perfect. Elena smiled for the first time in 24 hours. Set up a meeting, and Grace, thank you. Do not thank me yet. We have a long way to go. Elena hung up and looked at the papers one more time. She picked up the pen Bernard had left. Then she put it down. 72 hours. That was how long Marcus thought she needed to surrender. He was wrong. 2 days after her hospital stay, Elena checked into a motel off Interstate 84. The Pinewood Lodge was the kind of place that rented by the week and did not ask questions. The bedspread was scratchy, the television only got 12 channels, and the ice machine made sounds like a dying animal. It was perfect. Marcus had changed the locks on their house. He had frozen her access to their joint accounts. He thought he had left her with nothing. He had no idea. Elena sat on the bed, opened her laptop, and logged into a system that existed in no directory, on no server that Marcus could ever find. The screen filled with numbers, stock tickers, investment portfolios, real-time market data, Meridian Dynamics, current valuation, $2.3 billion. She owned 67% of it. Elena Marie Collins, the unemployed housewife who had not contributed a dime in 5 years, was one of the wealthiest women in America. And no one knew. Not Marcus, not his lawyers, not even Forbes, who had spent years trying to identify the mysterious founder known only as EM Architect. She thought about how it had started. 15 years ago, her father had died of pancreatic cancer. The hospital bills had bankrupted her family within months. Elena had been 19 years old, a nursing student with dreams of helping people, and she had watched the healthcare system grind her mother into dust. She dropped out of school. She worked double shifts at a diner. And at night, she taught herself to code. At 21, she took a $500 loan from her father's best friend, Big Tom Kowalski, and enrolled in a coding boot camp. At 23, she created an algorithm that could reduce hospital logistics costs by 40%. She licensed it anonymously, hiding behind layers of shell companies and NDAs. At 25, Meridian Dynamics was worth $50 million. At 28, it hit $1 billion. That was the year she met Marcus. He was charming then, handsome, ambitious, full of dreams about making it big. Elena was exhausted from building an empire in the shadows, lonely in a way that money could not fix. She wanted to be loved for herself, not her wealth. She wanted someone who would see the real Elena, the woman who burned roasts and laughed at bad jokes and cried at sappy movies. So she hid. She pretended to be a stay-at-home wife. She downgraded her wardrobe, let her manicures grow out, stopped wearing makeup. She cooked Marcus's meals, cleaned his house, listened to him complain about his day at the office. The office she secretly owned. It was supposed to be a test, a year, maybe two, to see if Marcus loved her for who she was. But the test had stretched into 5 years, and somewhere along the way, Elena had lost herself in the role she was playing. Now the role was over. Her phone buzzed. A message from Grace Mitchell, her executive assistant, and the only person who knew both sides of her identity. Someone is buying M Dynamics shares. Hostile accumulation. Started 3 days ago, currently at 12% and climbing. Elena's blood went cold. She typed back, "Who unknown," routed through offshore accounts. But the transaction fees were paid by a joint credit card registered to Marcus Collins. Elena stared at the screen. Marcus was trying to buy her company. Her company. Using money from their joint accounts, money that was half hers by law. He did not know what Meridian Dynamics was. He did not know she owned it. He had simply seen a hot investment opportunity and decided to grab it while simultaneously divorcing his wife into poverty. The irony was almost beautiful. Her phone rang. Grace. "There is more," Grace said without preamble. "The IP breach I told you about. They decoded part of your encrypted files. Not enough to identify you, but enough to know there is money. A lot of money." "What are they saying?" "Bernard Locke is building a case that you have hidden assets. He is going to argue that you defrauded Marcus by concealing wealth during the marriage." Elena laughed. It was a bitter sound, sharp as broken glass. "He thinks I defrauded Marcus. That is wonderful. What is our timeline?" "The divorce hearing is in 30 days, but there is a custody motion on the docket for next week. Marcus is pushing for emergency temporary custody based on your alleged mental instability." Elena felt her daughter kick, a tiny reminder that this fight was about more than money or pride. "I am going to need a lawyer," she said. "Set up the meeting with Patricia Monroe. Today, if possible." "Already done. She can see you at 2. Patricia Monroe's office was above a hardware store in downtown Hartford. The stairs creaked. The waiting room smelled like coffee and determination. A motivational poster on the wall said, "What doesn't kill you makes great evidence." Patty herself was 50 years old, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and eyes that had seen every kind of cruelty a spouse could inflict. She listened to Elena's story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When Elena finished, Patty set down her pen. "Let me make sure I understand. Your husband is divorcing you while you are 7 months pregnant. He has fabricated evidence of mental illness. He has hired one of the most ruthless divorce attorneys in the state. He is hiding assets while accusing you of hiding assets. And he is trying to buy stock in a company you secretly own using money that is legally half yours." "That is correct." Patty leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Collins, I have been doing this for 25 years. I thought I had seen everything." She smiled grimly. "I was wrong. This is genuinely impressive in its awfulness. Can you help me?" "I can help you, but I need to ask you something first." Patty's eyes were sharp. "Do you want to win fair, or do you want to win?" Elena thought about Marcus standing over her hospital bed, telling her she had 72 hours to surrender. She thought about her daughter, growing inside her, innocent of all this ugliness. I want to win, she said, and whatever it takes. Patty nodded. Good. Then let us begin. For 3 weeks, Elena lived a double life. By day, she was the struggling, soon-to-be divorced housewife, staying in cheap motels, wearing clothes from thrift stores, playing the role Marcus expected her to play. She met with Patty Monroe in the cramped office above the hardware store, building her case one document at a time. By night, she was EM architect, directing her executive team through encrypted video calls, fighting off the hostile takeover that Marcus did not know he was funding. The hostile buyer had accumulated 28% of Meridian Dynamics shares. Elena still held 67%, but without her physical presence to authorize certain transactions, her hands were tied. Grace was doing everything she could, but there were limits. You need to attend the board meeting, Grace said during one late-night call, in person, otherwise we cannot block the acquisition. I know, but if I show up now, Marcus's lawyers will use it against me. They will say I was hiding assets. And if you do not show up, you lose the company. Elena rubbed her temples. She was 8 months pregnant now, exhausted in ways that went deeper than physical. Give me one more week. Just one more week. The first small victory came on a Tuesday. Patty called with news that made Elena want to cry with relief. The judge granted our motion. The 72-hour deadline is void. You have 30 days to respond to the divorce petition, and I got the temporary restraining order. Marcus cannot touch the joint accounts until the hearing. Elena sank onto the motel bed. What about custody? Still pending, but I filed a counter motion. Pointed out that the therapy notes are unsigned and lack proper documentation. The judge is skeptical. We bought time. That night, Elena drove to Ohio. Big Tom Kowalski's diner sat on the edge of a town that time had mostly forgotten. The neon sign flickered. Half the letters burned out. The parking lot needed repaving. But inside, it smelled like coffee and apple pie and everything good about Elena's childhood. Big Tom himself was 62 years old, built like a refrigerator, with hands calloused from decades of honest work. He had been her father's best friend, her first investor, and the closest thing to family she had left. Ellie girl, he wrapped her in a bear hug, careful of her belly. Lord have mercy. Look at you. She sat in her usual booth, the one by the window where she used to do homework after school. Big Tom brought her pie and decaf coffee without asking. Tell me everything, he said. So she did. The divorce, the lassies, the company she had built from nothing, the husband who had never bothered to see who she really was. Big Tom listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. My daddy used to say something, he finally said. When a snake goes quiet, he ain't sleeping. He is aiming. You watch Marcus now. The quiet ones are planning something. He is already planning. His lawyers are building a case that I am mentally unstable. And what are you planning? Elena smiled. It was the first real smile in weeks. I am planning to destroy him, financially, professionally, and personally. I am going to take everything he values and show him that it was never really his. Big Tom nodded slowly. Your daddy would be proud. Just remember, Ellie girl, revenge is a dish best served cold, but do not let it freeze your heart. The second victory came 2 days later. Patty called again, her voice almost giddy. The judge froze Marcus's hidden accounts. All of them. We found 6 separate offshore transfers totaling $1.2 million. He has been siphoning money for over a year. Elena felt a rush of vindication. What happens now? Now we push for a full forensic audit. If we can prove he was planning this divorce while actively defrauding you, the custody argument falls apart. No judge will give a child to a man who was stealing from her mother. This is it, Patty. This is our chance. Do not celebrate yet. We still have a long way to go. But Elena did celebrate, just a little. She ate an extra slice of pie at Big Tom's. She slept through the night for the first time in a month. She felt for the first time since that awful anniversary dinner like she might actually win. 3 days later, everything collapsed. She was in her motel room when she heard the knock. Not the polite knock of housekeeping, but the sharp, authoritative knock of people who expected to be obeyed. She opened the door to find two police officers and a woman in a gray suit. "Elena Collins," the woman said. "Yes. I am Dr. Patricia Hayward from the Connecticut Department of Mental Health. We have a court order for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation." Where Elena's blood turned to ice. "On what grounds?" Storm. Hayward handed her a document. "Your husband has provided evidence that you are a danger to yourself and your unborn child. You have been making claims about owning a billion-dollar company. You have been living in motels, exhibiting paranoid behavior, and refusing to cooperate with reasonable divorce proceedings. Those claims are true. I do own a billion-dollar company." Dr. Hayward's expression was carefully neutral. "That is exactly the kind of statement we need to evaluate." Elena looked at the police officers, at the court order, at the hospital transport waiting in the parking lot. "I have rights," she said. "I want to call my lawyer." "You can call from the facility." They took her phone. They took her laptop. They put her in the back of a van and drove her to a psychiatric facility 20 miles outside Hartford. And somewhere across town, Marcus Collins was having dinner with Danielle Hartwell, celebrating his victory. Elena sat in a locked room, 8 months pregnant, stripped of everything she had fought for. This was rock bottom, or so she thought. The psychiatric facility was called Greenwood Rest. It had cheerful yellow walls, motivational posters about hope and healing, and locks on every door. Elena spent the first night staring at the ceiling, her hand pressed against her belly, feeling her daughter kick. "I am so sorry," she whispered to the baby. "I am going to fix this. I promise." But she did not know how. The next morning, a psychiatrist named Dr. Howard Bennett came to evaluate her. He was in his 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, in a manner that suggested he had seen too much of the world's cruelty to be surprised by any of it. "Mrs. Collins," he said, settling into a chair across from her. "Tell me about yourself." Elena laughed bitterly. "What would you like to know? That my husband is having me committed to avoid a fair divorce? That he fabricated evidence to steal my daughter? That I am perfectly sane and this is all a legal maneuver?" "Let us start with the company." Dr. Bennett consulted his notes. "You claim to own a majority stake in Meridian Dynamics, a technology firm valued at over $2 billion. "I do not claim it. It is a fact." "Do you have proof?" Lena thought about Grace, who could verify everything with a single phone call. But her phone was confiscated. She thought about the encrypted files on her laptop, now sitting in evidence somewhere. She thought about the years she had spent hiding her identity precisely so moments like this could not happen. "No," she admitted. "Not here, not with me." Dr. Bennett nodded slowly. "You understand how that sounds." "I understand that my husband has engineered a situation where telling the truth makes me look insane. That is a very paranoid interpretation. It is also a very accurate one." They sat in silence for a moment. "Dr. Bennett," Elena said quietly, "I am not asking you to believe me. I am asking you to investigate. Look up Meridian Dynamics. Look up the founder, EM architect. Look at the financial records, the board minutes, the incorporation documents. Then tell me I am delusional." Something shifted in the doctor's expression. "You seem very certain." "I am certain because it is true. I built that company with my own hands. I started with nothing, less than nothing, and I created something that employs 3,000 people and saves hospitals millions of dollars every year. And I hid it because I wanted my husband to love me for myself, not my money." Elena felt tears threatening, but she forced them back. "That was my mistake, not madness, just love." Dr. Bennett was quiet for a long time. "I will look into it," he said finally. "But you need to understand, Mrs. Collins, even if everything you are saying is true, you are still here for 72 hours. That is the law." "I understand." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Mrs. Collins, one more question. If you are who you say you are, why did you hide it for so long? Why pretend to be less than you were?" Elena thought about Marcus on their first date, nervous and eager, telling her about his dreams. She thought about the woman she had been, tired and lonely, desperate for someone to see her as something other than a bank account. "Because I thought that was what love required," she said. I thought I had to make myself small for someone else to feel big. I was wrong. Dr. Bennett nodded. That is not madness either. That is just being human. He left. Elena spent the next 2 days in a fog of anxiety and helplessness. She had no phone, no computer, no way to reach Grace or Patty or Big Tom. She did not know what was happening to her company, her case, her life. On the morning of the third day, a nurse brought her a message. It had been delivered by courier, the nurse explained, addressed to Elena personally. The nurse had argued with administration for an hour to get permission to deliver it. Elena opened the envelope with shaking hands. It was from Grace. The message was short. M Dynamics Board emergency meeting tomorrow. Hostile buyer at 31%. Without your authorization, I cannot block the acquisition. You have 5 days before you lose majority control. I am so sorry. I tried everything. Elena felt the room spin. While she was locked in a psychiatric facility, unable to prove her own identity, someone was stealing her company. The company she had built from nothing. The company that was supposed to be her daughter's inheritance. She pressed her hand against her belly and felt her daughter kick. No, Elena said aloud. No, I will not let them take this from us. She asked to see Dr. Bennett. When he arrived, she was standing by the window, calm in a way that surprised even herself. Dr. Bennett, she said, I need you to do something for me. I cannot release you early, Mrs. Collins. The court order is clear. I am not asking for release. I am asking for a laptop, supervised, monitored, whatever protocols you need. I just need 10 minutes to prove who I am. Dr. Bennett studied her for a long moment. If you are lying, he said, this will only make your situation worse. I know, he sighed. Wait here. 20 minutes later, he returned with a hospital laptop. A nurse stood by the door watching. Elena typed Meridian Dynamics founder into the search bar. The results appeared instantly. Articles about the mysterious EM architect. Speculation about identity. Estimates of net worth ranging from 800 million to 1.5 billion. That is me, Elena said. Are you sure? EM stands for Elena Marie. Architect is a reference to my father. He was a factory worker, but he used to say he was an architect of better days for his family. Dr. Bennett read the articles. His eyebrows rose higher with each paragraph. This is circumstantial, he said carefully. It does not prove. Log into the Meridian Dynamics investor portal. Use these credentials. Elena wrote a username and password on a piece of paper. It will take you to the shareholder registry. My name will be listed as the primary stakeholder. Dr. Bennett hesitated. Then he typed. The portal loaded. The registry appeared. And there, at the top of the list, was the name Elena Marie Collins, 67% ownership. Dr. Bennett sat back in his chair. Mrs. Collins, he said slowly, why on earth would a billionaire hide in a motel and allow herself to be dragged to a psychiatric facility? Elena smiled sadly. Because I made the mistake of thinking that love meant making myself invisible. And now I am learning what it costs to be seen. Bennett closed the laptop. Your 72 hours are up at 5 o'clock this afternoon, he said. I will sign your release papers at 4:59. But Mrs. Collins, whatever you are planning next, be careful. Whoever is trying to take your company is not going to stop just because you got out of here. I know, Elena said, but now I am done hiding. Elena walked out of Greenwood Rest at 5:15 on a Thursday afternoon. She was wearing the same clothes she had arrived in 3 days earlier. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes were red from sleepless nights, and her 8-month pregnant belly preceded her like a declaration of war. Waiting in the parking lot was Grace Mitchell. Grace was 58 years old, silver-haired, steel-spined, and absolutely unflappable. She had been with Elena for 12 years, since the early days of Meridian Dynamics when they were working out of a basement apartment and surviving on ramen noodles. She was not just an executive assistant. She was family. You look terrible, Grace said by way of greeting. I feel terrible. What is the situation? Bad. Grace opened the car door for her. The hostile buyer is at 31%. The emergency board meeting is tomorrow at 9. Without you there in person, we cannot authorize the defensive measures. James Henderson, your longest-serving board member, is threatening to flip because he thinks you have abandoned the company. Elena slid into the passenger seat. What else? Marcus filed for emergency custody yesterday. He is claiming you absconded from psychiatric care and are a flight risk because of your hidden billions. The hearing is in 4 days. So he knows about the money now. Everyone knows. Someone leaked your identity to the press this morning. It is all over social media. Grace pulled out her phone and showed Elena a headline. Billionaire ghost revealed as pregnant housewife in divorce scandal. Elena skimmed the article. The narrative had been spun exactly as she feared. Wealthy woman pretends to be poor, traps innocent man in marriage, hides billions while playing victim. Who leaked it? Bernard Locke's firm. Has to be. They are getting ahead of the story, trying to make you look like the villain. Elena thought about Marcus, probably sitting in his office right now, feeling triumphant. He had found her secret. He had exposed her. He thought he had won. He had no idea. Grace, Elena said, how much of Whitmore and Associates do we own? Grace frowned. Whitmore is a subsidiary of Hale Financial Group. Hale is 51% owned by Meridian Dynamics. So technically, we own the majority stake in the company where Marcus works. Correct, Elena smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Does he know that? No, the ownership structure is buried under 3 holding companies. His name is nowhere near any of it. Good. Elena leaned back in her seat. Here is what we are going to do. For the next 3 hours, Elena made calls. She spoke to lawyers, accountants, private investigators, and board members. She authorized transactions, reviewed documents, and assembled a team that would make Bernard Locke's law firm look like a lemonade stand. By midnight, she had a plan. At 8:45 the next morning, Elena walked into the Meridian Dynamics headquarters in downtown Hartford. She had never been there in person before. For 12 years, she had existed only as a voice on a conference call, a name on a document, a ghost in the machine. The employees knew EM Architect as a legend, not a person. Now the legend had a face. And that face was 8 months pregnant, wearing a designer maternity suit that Grace had procured at 4 in the morning, and carrying a determination that could have melted steel. The receptionist looked up as she approached. Can I help you? I am Elena Collins, she said. I own this building. Please tell the board I have arrived. The boardroom went silent when she walked in. 12 people sat around the table, all of them powerful, all of them wealthy, all of them accustomed to being the most important person in any room. They stared at her like she had just arrived from another planet. Good morning, Elena said, taking her seat at the head of the table. I apologize for the delay. I was detained. Shall we begin? James Henderson, the board member who had been threatening to flip, found his voice first. Mrs. Collins, with respect, we have been trying to reach you for weeks. This hostile takeover is being funded by my husband, Elena interrupted, using money he stole from our joint accounts. Money that is legally half mine, which means approximately 15% of those hostile shares were purchased with my own assets. The room went very quiet. I have documentation, Elena continued, sliding a folder across the table. Bank transfers, transaction records, a complete paper trail. Mr. Marcus Collins has been engaging in financial fraud, and he has been using it to try to steal a company he does not even know I own. Henderson leafed through the documents. His face went pale. There is more, Elena said. The law firm handling the acquisition, Locke and Associates, illegally accessed my personal files. They violated attorney-client privilege, hacked encrypted communications, and shared confidential information with a party adverse to their client's interests. I have filed a complaint with the Bar Association and a criminal referral with the FBI. She paused to let that sink in. Ladies and gentlemen, I did not build this company to watch it be stolen by a man who thinks my value is measured by whether I can discuss equity splits at dinner parties. I built it by working harder, thinking smarter, and never giving up, even when the world told me I was crazy. Elena looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. I am asking for your trust. Authorize the defensive measures, block the acquisition, and watch me take back everything that was stolen from me. The vote was unanimous. For 5 days, Elena allowed herself to hope. The hostile takeover was blocked. The board was united behind her. Patty Monroe had filed motions that exposed Marcus's financial fraud and challenged the psychiatric hold. Even the media narrative was starting to shift, as reporters dug deeper and discovered that the poor deceived husband was actually a cheating thief who had been planning his wife's destruction for years. Elena moved into a hotel near the courthouse. A real hotel this time, with room service and a spa. Grace brought her files to review and healthy meals to eat. Her daughter kicked constantly, as if she could sense that the tide was turning. "We have him," Patty said during a strategy session the night before the custody hearing. The forensic audit found 6 hidden accounts, totaling $1.8 million. "We have evidence of bribery, insurance fraud, and falsified credentials for his mistress. The therapy notes he used to get you committed are unsigned and undated. The psychiatrist who was supposed to testify for him has suddenly developed a vacation conflict." What about the company? Lockdown. Marcus's shares have been frozen pending the fraud investigation. He cannot sell, cannot vote, cannot do anything. Elena felt something unknot in her chest. So it is over. Almost. Patty's expression was cautious. The custody hearing is still risky. Marcus's lawyers are good. They are going to argue that you hid a fortune from your husband, that you are capable of elaborate deception, that you cannot be trusted. They are going to use my success against me. Exactly. So tomorrow we need to be perfect. No surprises. The next morning, Elena put on her best maternity suit and went to court. The hearing room was smaller than she expected, with fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill. Marcus was already seated at the defendant's table, flanked by Bernard Locke and 2 junior attorneys. He looked thinner than she remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. Good, Elena thought. He should look tired. He should look worried. The first hour went exactly as Patty had predicted. The forensic evidence was presented. The fraud was documented. Marcus's attorneys objected and argued and tried to spin, but the facts were overwhelming. Then Bernard Locke called a surprise witness. The defense calls Dr. Marcus Webb. Elena's stomach dropped. Dr. Webb was a psychiatrist from New Haven. Silver-haired and distinguished, with credentials that stretched for pages. He took the stand with the confidence of a man who had testified in hundreds of courtrooms. "Dr. Webb," Bernard Locke began, "you have reviewed Mrs. Collins's medical records, her behavioral history, and her recent psychiatric hold. What is your professional opinion of her mental state?" "It is my opinion that Mrs. Collins exhibits classic signs of narcissistic personality disorder with paranoid features. Her elaborate deception of her husband, her hidden financial dealings, and her grandiose claims about her own importance are consistent with a pattern of pathological behavior." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "In your professional opinion," Locke continued, "is Mrs. Collins fit to be the primary caregiver for a newborn child?" "No," Dr. Webb said firmly. "I believe the child would be at significant risk in her care. Mrs. Collins requires ongoing psychiatric treatment, not the stress of single parenthood." Patty was on her feet immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. This witness was not disclosed. We have had no opportunity to review his qualifications or challenge his methodology." "Your Honor," Locke replied smoothly, "Dr. Webb was only retained yesterday when our original expert became unavailable. The defense has a right to present expert testimony." The judge frowned. "I will allow the testimony, but the plaintiff will have full opportunity for cross-examination." It was not enough. Elena watched the judge's face as Dr. Webb spoke. She saw the doubt creeping in. The hidden billions, the elaborate secret identity, the psychiatric hold. It did look crazy from the outside. It looked exactly how Marcus wanted it to look. When Patty finally got her turn to cross-examine, she attacked Dr. Webb's methodology, his lack of direct evaluation, his financial ties to Marcus's legal team. But the damage was done. The narrative had shifted. The judge adjourned for the day without ruling. That night, Elena sat in her hotel room, staring at the ceiling. She had been so close to winning. And now her greatest strength, her company, her success, her independence, had become a weapon against her. At 2 in the morning, her water broke. 3 weeks early. Stress-induced, Grace drove her to the hospital at 90 miles per hour. 14 hours later, Elena gave birth to a daughter. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, 10 fingers, 10 toes. Perfect. She named her Lily Grace Collins. For 3 hours, Elena held her daughter in the hospital bed, watching her sleep, memorizing every eyelash and fingernail. Then the door opened. A nurse entered, followed by a woman in a gray suit. Behind them stood Marcus. "Mrs. Collins," the woman said, "I am Sarah Patterson from the Department of Children and Families. I have a court order for emergency custody transfer of the minor child Lily Collins to her father, pending resolution of the ongoing competency hearing." Elena clutched her daughter tighter. "No, no, you cannot do this." "I am sorry, ma'am. It is a court order. You can appeal within 48 hours. Marcus stepped forward, his face arranged in an expression of concern that did not reach his eyes. "Do not make this harder than it has to be, Elena. I am just trying to protect our daughter." They took Lily from her arms. Elena screamed. She begged. She tried to get out of bed and collapsed, still weak from delivery. The last thing she saw was her daughter's sleeping face disappearing through the hospital door. This was rock bottom. This was the lowest point of the story. Elena lay in the hospital bed, bleeding and broken, and wondered if she had finally lost everything. The hospital discharge papers were still warm in Elena's hand when she walked out into the cold morning air. Her body screamed with every step. 14 hours of labor, an emergency cesarean when Lily's heart rate dropped, 37 stitches, and a blood transfusion. The doctors had begged her to stay another 48 hours. She had signed herself out against medical advice at 5:47 in the morning because somewhere across town, her daughter was sleeping in a stranger's house, and that stranger was her father. Big Tom was waiting by his truck, engine running, heat blasting. He did not say anything when he saw her shuffling toward him, hunched over her incision, face gray with exhaustion and grief. He just opened the passenger door and helped her climb in like she was made of glass. "Where to, Ellie girl?" Elena stared straight ahead. "The motel. Grace is waiting." They drove in silence through the empty streets. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful. Elena hated it. How dare the world be beautiful when her daughter was gone? The motel room had been transformed into a war room. Grace had covered every flat surface with documents, timelines, and photographs. Patty Monroe was on the phone in the corner, arguing with someone about subpoena deadlines. 2 laptops displayed financial records. A whiteboard listed names and connections in red marker. "Elena," Grace crossed the room and wrapped her in a gentle hug, careful of her stitches. "You should be in bed." "I will be in bed when I have my daughter back." "What do we have?" Grace led her to a chair, practically forcing her to sit down. "We have a lot, but you need to understand the timeline first. The custody hearing is in 46 hours. That is when the judge will decide whether to make the emergency order permanent or return Lily to you." 46 hours. Elena closed her eyes. "What has Marcus been doing with her?" Grace hesitated. "Tell me." "He hired a baby nurse, a professional. He has not actually held Lily himself since the first photo op at the hospital. The nurse does everything, feeding, changing, soothing. Marcus shows up for Instagram pictures, then disappears to his girlfriend's apartment." Elena felt something hot and sharp twist in her chest. Her daughter was a prop, a bargaining chip, a tool for her father to use and discard. "There is more," Patty said, hanging up the phone. "Victoria Ashford came to see me this morning." "Marcus's mother? What did she want?" "To confess." Patty sat down across from Elena, her expression grim. "She has known about Marcus's plan for over a year. She tried to talk him out of it, but he refused. And here is the part that changes everything." Patty leaned forward. "Marcus does not want Lily. He has never wanted her. He told his mother that babies are anchors, and he has no intention of being dragged down by one. The custody threat is leverage, nothing more. His plan is to threaten you with a prolonged legal battle until you agree to pay him $5 million. Then he will sign over his parental rights and disappear to the Cayman Islands with Danielle." Elena sat very still. "He is holding our daughter for ransom. That is exactly what he is doing. Victoria is willing to testify, but she is terrified of her son. She thinks he might retaliate somehow, ruin her reputation, cut her off from the family money." "Will she testify anyway?" "She said she will, but she is fragile, Elena. If Marcus's lawyers attack her on the stand, she might crumble." Big Tom, who had been standing silently by the door, finally spoke. Ellie girl, I have been listening to all of this and I need to say something. Elena looked at him. I knew your daddy for 40 years. He was my best friend. And if he were here right now, he would tell you the same thing I am about to tell you. He walked over and crouched down beside her chair, his massive hand covering hers. Stop fighting fair. This man does not deserve fair. He deserves to be destroyed so completely that he spends the rest of his miserable life knowing exactly what he lost and exactly why he lost it. And you, Ellie girl, you are the only person on this planet who can do it. Elena looked at the whiteboard, at the names and connections, at the web of fraud and deception that Marcus had spent years building. Then she looked at a photograph pinned to the corner. Lily's newborn picture, taken by a hospital photographer just hours before she was stolen. Grace, Elena said quietly, pull the ownership records for Whitmore and Associates. Every subsidiary, every holding company, every connection back to Meridian Dynamics. Already done, Grace handed her a folder. The chain is buried under 3 shell companies, but it is unbroken. Marcus Collins has been employed by a company you control for 5 years. He just never knew it. And his expense reports, flagged for the last 18 months. He has been billing personal dinners, hotel rooms, and jewelry purchases as client entertainment. Total fraudulent expenses, $47,000. The jewelry, Elena's voice sharpened, the pieces he reported stolen for insurance. Same pieces that appear on Danielle's Instagram. I have screenshots with metadata showing dates and locations. Elena stood up slowly, ignoring the pain that shot through her abdomen. Here's what we are going to do. For the next hour, she outlined a plan that made Patty Monroe, a woman who had seen every dirty trick in the divorce playbook, actually gasp. When she finished, Big Tom was grinning. Grace was frantically taking notes. Patty looked like she had just witnessed the birth of a new kind of warfare. Elena, Patty said carefully, if we do this, there is no going back. You will not just defeat Marcus, you will annihilate him. His career, his reputation, his freedom, everything. Good. Elena picked up the photograph of her daughter. He took my baby from my arms 12 hours after I gave birth. He let me bleed and cry and beg while he posed for Instagram. He has spent 2 years planning to destroy me, and he almost succeeded. She looked at each of them in turn. Now it is my turn. They worked through the night. By dawn, they had assembled a case file that would make any prosecutor weep with joy. The bribery payments to Dr. Marcus Webb, the insurance fraud with Danielle's jewelry, the falsified psychiatric records, the hostile takeover funded with marital assets, the forged therapy notes, the hacked encrypted files. Every piece of evidence was documented, cross-referenced, and organized for maximum courtroom impact. At 7 o'clock, Grace ordered breakfast from the diner across the street. Elena forced herself to eat half a muffin and drink a glass of orange juice. She needed her strength. At 8 o'clock, she took a shower, letting the hot water run over her aching body until the mirror fogged completely. At 8:30, she put on the white power suit that Grace had bought for her board meeting. It still fit, barely, and the color made her look like she was glowing. She looked at herself in the mirror. She did not look like a victim. She did not look like a woman who had just given birth, been hospitalized, had her daughter stolen, and slept 3 hours in the past week. She looked like a woman who was about to win. Let us go get my daughter, she said. The courthouse steps were swarming with reporters. Word had spread about the billionaire housewife and her explosive custody battle. Every major news network had sent cameras. Bloggers and podcasters jostled for position. Someone had even set up a drone, which security was trying unsuccessfully to catch. Elena's legal team had arranged for her to enter through a side door, but she stopped them with a raised hand. No, I'm going into the front. Elena, the media circus, that is exactly why. She straightened her jacket. Marcus has spent 2 years controlling the narrative, making me look crazy, making me look deceitful, making me look like the villain. Today, the world sees the truth, and they see it from the moment I walk up those steps. She got out of the car. The reporters surged forward like a wave, shouting questions, thrusting microphones in her direction. Mrs. Collins, is it true you hid a fortune from your husband? Did you really build a $1 billion company in secret? What do you say to accusations that you manipulated your husband into marriage? Elena stopped at the top of the steps and turned to face them. The cameras clicked and flashed. The crowd fell silent, waiting. My name is Elena Marie Collins, she said, her voice clear and strong. I am the founder and majority shareholder of Meridian Dynamics, a company that employs 3,000 people and has saved hospitals across America over $200 million in the past decade. She paused. I hid my success because I wanted my husband to love me for who I was, not what I owned. For 5 years, I cooked his meals, cleaned his house, and supported his career. And 2 weeks ago, 7 months pregnant with his child, he served me with divorce papers and told me I was dead weight. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Yesterday, my daughter was taken from my arms 12 hours after I gave birth. Not because I am unfit, not because I am dangerous, but because my husband sees her as a bargaining chip, a tool to extort money from the woman he swore to love and protect. Elena's voice did not waver. Today, I am going to get her back, and I am going to show the world exactly what kind of man Marcus Collins really is. She turned and walked into the courthouse, leaving the reporters in stunned silence. The courtroom was smaller than the crowd outside suggested. Wood panel walls, fluorescent lights, the faint smell of old paper and older justice. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Every eye followed Elena as she walked to the plaintiff's table. Marcus was already seated at the defendant's table, flanked by Bernard Locke and 3 junior attorneys. He was wearing his most expensive suit, the charcoal Armani that Elena had secretly paid for with company funds. His hair was perfectly styled. His expression was carefully arranged into something resembling concern, but his hands were shaking. Elena noticed. She always noticed. All rise, the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Patricia Morrow presiding. Judge Morrow took her seat and surveyed the courtroom with the weary expression of someone who had seen too much human ugliness to be surprised by any of it. Be seated. We are here to resolve the emergency custody matter of Collins versus Collins. I have reviewed the submissions from both parties. Mr. Locke, you filed the emergency motion. Please proceed. Bernard Locke stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. Thank you, Your Honor. As the court is aware, Mrs. Collins was recently released from a psychiatric facility where she was held for evaluation. During her hospitalization, she made grandiose claims about owning a multi-billion-dollar corporation, claims that were initially dismissed as delusional. He paused for effect. It now appears that these claims may have some basis in reality. But that raises an even more troubling question. If Mrs. Collins did indeed build a secret financial empire while married to my client, then she engaged in a systematic campaign of deception that lasted for years. She lied about her employment. She lied about her assets. She lied about who she was. Locke turned to face Elena directly. Can a woman capable of such elaborate fraud be trusted to raise a child? Can a woman who hid billions of dollars from her own husband be expected to act in good faith in any custody arrangement? We submit that she cannot. Until a complete psychological evaluation is performed and her true financial status is fully disclosed, the child must remain with her father. He sat down looking pleased with himself. Judge Morrow nodded. Ms. Monroe? Patty rose slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch. Your Honor, Mr. Locke has just made a fascinating argument. He claims that my client is unfit because she built a successful business, because she achieved something remarkable without depending on a man, because she had the audacity to be intelligent, ambitious, and private about her accomplishments. She walked toward the center of the courtroom. Let me be very clear about what actually happened in this marriage. Well, Collins met Marcus Collins when she was already a millionaire. She chose to hide her wealth because she wanted to be loved for herself, not her money. Was that naive? Perhaps. Was it illegal? Absolutely not. There is no law requiring a woman to disclose her net worth to a dating partner. Patty held up a document. What is illegal is bribery. The defense's expert witness, Dr. Marcus Webb, received a payment of $50,000 from a shell company 3 days before his testimony. That shell company is registered to the wife of Mr. Bernard Locke. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrow banged her gavel. Order. Mr. Locke, approach the bench. Bernard Locke's face had gone the color of old milk. He walked toward the judge on unsteady legs. I have no knowledge of any such payment, Your Honor. If my wife made independent arrangements. Save it! Judge Morrow's voice could have flash-frozen a volcano. Dr. Webb's testimony is stricken from the record. You will be hearing from the Bar Association before the end of the day. Return to your seat. Locke stumbled back to the defendant's table. Marcus was staring at him with an expression of mounting horror. Continue, Ms. Monroe, the judge said. Thank you, Your Honor. The bribery is just the beginning. Patty began placing documents on the evidence table, one after another, each one a nail in Marcus Collins's coffin. Bank records showing 6 hidden accounts totaling $1.8 million, all transfers made without Mrs. Collins's knowledge or consent. Thud. Insurance claims for jewelry reported stolen, jewelry that appears in dated photographs on Mr. Collins's mistress's Instagram account. Thud. Forged therapy notes used to justify the psychiatric hold. Notes that are unsigned, undated, and reference several sessions that never occurred. Thud. Evidence of illegal access to sealed medical and financial records performed by a computer forensics firm hired by Mr. Locke's office. Thud. And finally, Your Honor, documentation showing that Mr. Collins has been planning this divorce for over 2 years. The first transfer of marital assets to a hidden account occurred 23 months ago. He was not blindsided by his wife's success. He was executing a premeditated campaign to strip her of everything she had while simultaneously cheating on her with a subordinate. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Then Patty smiled. But I have saved the best for last. She turned to Elena. Mrs. Collins, would you please explain your relationship to your husband's employer? Elena stood. Her legs were steady. Her voice was clear. Your Honor, Meridian Dynamics, the company I founded and control, owns 51% of Hale Financial Group. Hale Financial Group owns Whitmore and Associates, the investment firm where Marcus Collins has been employed for the past 5 years. She let that sink in. Every paycheck my husband has received since we were married came from a company I control. The office he works in, I own the building. The expense account he used to take his mistress to dinner, I approved that budget. The bonus he received last Christmas, the one he used to buy her a tennis bracelet while telling me we could not afford to fix the roof, I signed off on it. Marcus was shaking his head, mouthing the word no over and over. My husband divorced me because he thought I was worthless. He looked at the woman who cooked his meals, raised his child, and supported his career, and he saw nothing of value. He had no idea that I was the one who made his career possible in the first place. Elena turned to face Marcus directly. You wanted to know who I really am? I am your boss. I have been your boss since the day we met. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, you are fired. Your desk has already been cleaned out. Security escorted your personal belongings to the curb. Marcus lunged to his feet. You cannot do this. You cannot. Sit down, Mr. Collins, Judge Morrow thundered. Another outburst and I will hold you in contempt. But Marcus was beyond reason. Years of carefully constructed arrogance were crumbling in real time. Elena, please. He pushed past his attorneys, stumbling toward her. I did not know. I swear to God, I did not know. I love you. I have always loved you. It was Danielle. She manipulated me. She told me you were holding me back. The bailiffs moved to intercept him. I will do anything. Marcus fell to his knees in the middle of the courtroom, tears streaming down his face. Please, Elena. Please, I am sorry. I am so sorry. Just give me another chance. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. I will be a better husband, a better father. Elena looked down at the man she had once loved, the man she had hidden herself for, the man she had believed would see her true worth if she just gave him enough time. He was pathetic. Not in a satisfying way, not in a way that brought her joy, just pathetic. A small, greedy, hollow man who had never deserved her. You timed the divorce so our daughter would not have legal standing, Elena said quietly. You fabricated evidence to have me committed. You tried to take Lily from my arms while I was still bleeding from giving birth to her. And you did all of it because you thought I was worthless. She shook her head. There is no counseling for that, Marcus. There is no second chance. There is only the life you built for yourself and the consequences that come with it. She turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I do not want his money. The $2 million he stole from our marriage can go to charity. I do not want his apology. Words mean nothing from a man who lies as easily as breathing. I want only one thing. Her voice cracked just slightly. I want my daughter. I want to take her home, hold her in my arms, and never let anyone take her from me again. Judge Morrow was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke. I have been on this bench for 30 years. I have seen every kind of cruelty that human beings can inflict on each other in the name of love, money, or revenge. But this case, Mr. Collins, represents a new low. She looked at Marcus, still kneeling on the floor, held in place by two bailiffs. You systematically planned the destruction of your wife while pretending to love her. You stole her money. You fabricated evidence of mental illness. You bribed a psychiatrist. You illegally accessed sealed records. And when all of that failed, you took her newborn daughter and used that child as a bargaining chip. The judge's voice was ice. Full custody of Lily Grace Collins is awarded to her mother, effective immediately. Collins, you are ordered to pay $2.1 million in restitution for the assets you illegally transferred. You are further ordered to have no contact with your daughter or your former wife, except through supervised channels approved by this court. She banged her gavel. Additionally, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution on charges of fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. Bailiffs, take Mr. Collins into custody pending arraignment. They lifted Marcus to his feet. His face was swollen and red, snot running from his nose, all pretense of dignity gone. Elena, please, I am begging you, do not do this. But Elena was already walking toward the door. Behind her, she heard a woman's voice cut through the chaos. Marcus, you told me you were rich. You said we would live in the Caymans. You lied to me. Danielle Hartwell was standing in the gallery, her face contorted with rage. She grabbed her designer handbag, the knockoff one she thought no one could tell was fake, and hurled it at Marcus's head. It missed him and hit Bernard Locke square in the face. The courtroom descended into chaos. Bailiffs scrambled. Reporters shouted. Someone was definitely filming on their phone. Elena did not look back. She walked out into the sunlight, down the courthouse steps, past the shouting reporters and flashing cameras. She walked all the way to the parking lot where Grace was waiting with the car. And then, finally, she let herself cry. Let us go get Lily, she whispered. An hour later, she held her daughter in her arms for the first time in 49 hours. Lily was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the war that had been fought for her. She smelled like baby powder and something ineffably sweet. Elena pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead and made a silent promise. No one would ever take her again. No one. 6 months later. The farmhouse stood on 50 acres of rolling Ohio hills, surrounded by fields that blazed gold in the autumn light. It had been a wreck when Elena bought it, abandoned for 15 years, more holes than walls. Now it gleamed with fresh paint and new windows, a testament to what could be built from ruins. Elena sat on the wraparound porch, Lily on her lap, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Her daughter was 6 months old now, chubby and curious, with her mother's green eyes and a personality that already suggested she would be trouble. The best kind of trouble. Big Tom emerged from the house carrying 2 mugs of coffee and a bottle for Lily. He was wearing a t-shirt that said, "World's okayest Godfather," a gift Elena had ordered from the internet at 3 in the morning during a feeding. Grace called, he said, settling into the rocking chair beside her. Something about Forbes wanting to do a cover story. I know. She told me this morning. What are you going to tell them? Elena watched Lily grab her finger, examining it with the intense concentration that babies bring to everything. I am going to tell them no. I spent 5 years hiding who I was. I do not need to spend the rest of my life explaining it. Big Tom nodded. Fair enough. Though I would not mind seeing your picture in a magazine. I could hang it in the diner. Tell everyone I knew you when. You did know me when. You gave me my first $500. Best investment I ever made. He took a sip of coffee. Speaking of investments, how is the foundation coming? Elena smiled. The Second Chance Foundation had launched 3 months ago. It provided emergency funds, legal support, and business mentorship to mothers escaping financial abuse. In 90 days, they had helped over 400 women. By the end of the year, Elena planned to expand to every major city in the country. "It is coming along," she said. "We just hired our 50th case manager, and the partnership with the domestic violence shelters is exceeding projections. Your daddy would be proud." "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies emerge over the fields. Grace's car appeared at the end of the long driveway, kicking up dust as it approached. She parked beside Big Tom's truck and walked toward the porch, tablet in hand, looking as unflappable as ever. "Sorry to interrupt the pastoral moment," she said, "but you are going to want to hear this. Good news or bad news? Depends on your perspective." Grace sat on the porch railing. The district attorney just announced charges. Marcus is facing 12 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of bribery, and 1 count of conspiracy. If convicted on all charges, he is looking at 15 to 20 years. Elena felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no relief. Just a vague acknowledgement that justice was being served. What about Bernard Locke? Disbarred as of yesterday, his firm is under investigation for 17 other cases where they may have used similar tactics. He is reportedly selling his house to pay legal fees. And Danielle? Grace actually smiled. "This is my favorite part. She moved back to Nebraska. She is working at her aunt's insurance office. Her Instagram has 312 followers now, all real, and she is dating a guy named Doug who drives a Honda Civic and thinks equity is something you do at the gym." Big Tom laughed. "Lord have mercy, how the mighty have fallen." "She was never mighty," Elena said. "She was just loud." Lily began to fuss, and Elena shifted her to the other arm, making soothing sounds. "There is one more thing," Grace said, her voice softening. "Victoria Ashford. She reached out to my office. She wants to know if she can send Lily birthday cards." Elena considered this. Victoria had testified against her own son. She had stood up in court and told the truth, even though it destroyed her family and her social standing. She had cried on the witness stand, not for Marcus, but for the grandchild she feared she would never know. "She can send cards," Elena said finally. "No visits yet, but cards are okay." Grace nodded. "I will let her know." "And Grace, thank you for everything. For 12 years of keeping my secrets and cleaning up my messes and believing in me even when I did not believe in myself." "Please," Grace waved a dismissive hand. "You pay me extremely well. Gratitude is included in the compensation package." But her eyes were bright, and Elena knew she meant more than she would ever say out loud. The sun had fully set now, leaving the sky awash in deep purples and blues. The first stars were appearing. "I should put this one to bed," Elena said, standing carefully with Lily in her arms. "Before you go," Big Tom said, "I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was creased and faded, the corners bent from years of handling. Elena took it. It showed a young man in a factory uniform, standing outside a brick building, squinting into the sun. He had dark hair and a crooked smile, and eyes that crinkled at the corners. "That is your daddy," Big Tom said, "the day he started at the plant. He was 19 years old. Thought he was going to change the world." Elena's throat tightened. "He did change the world," Big Tom continued. "He raised a daughter who grew up to help thousands of people. He just did not live long enough to see it." Elena traced her father's face with her fingertip. "I wish he could have met Lily." "He knows her." Big Tom's voice was rough. "Wherever he is, he knows her, and he is proud of both of you." Elena kissed Big Tom on the cheek, something she had never done before. He smelled like coffee and sawdust and decades of unwavering friendship. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for the $500, for the diner, for being here when I needed someone, for never giving up on me." "Get out of here," Big Tom said, blinking rapidly. "That baby needs her sleep." Elena carried Lily inside, up the stairs, to the nursery she had painted herself in soft greens and yellows. She laid her daughter in the crib and stood there for a long moment, watching her sleep. "I am going to tell you a story someday," Elena whispered. About a woman who thought she had to hide who she was to be loved, who spent years pretending to be less than she was, hoping someone would see her anyway, who learned the hard way that the only person who needs to see your worth is you. Lily sighed in her sleep, her tiny fist curling and uncurling. But here is the ending to that story. The woman stopped hiding. She stood up. She fought back. And she built something beautiful from the ashes of everything she lost. Elena leaned down and pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. You are going to change the world too, Lily Grace. I can already tell. And when the world tries to make you small, when people tell you to be quiet or invisible or less than you are, I want you to remember something. She straightened up, looking out the window at the stars appearing over the Ohio hills. You come from a long line of architects, people who build things from nothing, people who refuse to be broken. And no one, oh, no one gets to decide your worth but you. She turned off the lamp and walked to the door. Sleep well, baby girl. Tomorrow we build something new. And that is the story of Elena Collins, a woman who spent 5 years making herself invisible because she thought that was what love required. A man who looked at a diamond and saw a rock. And a lesson that I hope every single person listening takes to heart. Your worth is not determined by the people who fail to see it. Your value does not decrease because someone is too blind to recognize it. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the cards. Now I have a question for you. What would you have done in Elena's place? Would you have revealed yourself sooner? Would you have forgiven Marcus? Or would you have burned it all down just like she did? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and I love hearing your thoughts on these stories. And if this story hit you somewhere deep, if it made you angry or hopeful, or maybe reminded you of someone you know, do me a small favor. Hit that like button. It sounds simple, but it genuinely helps more people find these stories. Share it with a friend who needs to hear that they are worth more than they have been told. We all know someone who is shrinking themselves to fit inside someone else's small vision. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Click that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss our next story. We post new drama every single day, and I promise you the next one is just as wild as this one. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. You are the reason I keep telling these stories. I will see you in the next one.